hopefully you won't get mad if we talk about anger today. In The Father of the Bride, George Banks, played by Steve Martin, is fed up with being the father of the bride. He's emotionally and socially and especially financially taxed. He goes to the grocery store, and at the grocery store he discovers that the hot dogs he's buying, the buns come in packages of 12, but the wieners come in packages of 8. And so he is tearing the packages of buns apart and removing what he calls the superfluous buns. An employee at the store asks him what he's doing, telling him, "We don't sell buns separately." And he says, "I'll tell you what I'm doing. These buns don't match the number of wieners." And he says, "Here's why this is happening. Some big shot at the wiener company got together with some big shot at the bun company and decided to rip off the American public. I'm not paying for one more thing that I don't need. George Banks is saying no." And he loses his cool and ends up in jail. Let's talk about anger today and 5 ways that we can deal with it. Number 1, we can suppress it, press it down, deny that it's there. Number 2, we can express it aggressively, like George Banks was doing. We can be passive aggressive is the 3rd way we can deal with anger. And then we can be assertive, or we can drop it or hand it over to the Lord, turn it over to God. Now, in the book of Ephesians, the Apostle Paul begins the first 3 chapters telling the readers who they are in Christ, what Christ has done for them, and in the last 4 chapters, what are the implications of that for how we live. And today we're looking at chapter 4, part of the implications of how we live in view of the gospel. And I want you to notice 3 commands that the Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 26 and 27. Watch for the 3 commands as he quotes Psalm 4 to begin with. "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." So did you hear the 3 commands? In your anger, do not sin. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, and don't give the devil a foothold. In your anger, do not sin. Now, I have observed people and myself and have concluded that most of us tend to be either imploders or exploders when it comes to anger. That is, we either tend to stuff it and deny it and push it down, or we tend to let it out in an aggressive fashion. Now, people who are exploders do a lot of damage when they explode. Needless to say, they damage their health, but they also damage their relationships. Imploders, on the other hand, tend to do a lot of damage mostly to themselves and may end up being bitter or depressed and harming their own health. Which category would you say you fit in? Now, you might say, well, I implode, then I explode. But I want you to try to pick one. Would you say you're more of an imploder when it comes to anger or an exploder? When I pastored in Springfield, I had a police officer in the congregation, and we got to talking about traffic lights one day, and we were talking about the meaning of a yellow light. He said, "What does a yellow light mean?" And I knew that it meant caution. And he asked me this question. He said, when somebody steps on the gas to get through the intersection before it turns red, is that being cautious? I'd never thought of it that way. I said, no, it's not. He said, I give tickets to people for doing that. Well, I want to say that anger should be treated like a yellow light. Slow down. Be cautious. There's a danger here. In your anger, do not sin. Don't ignore your anger, but also don't speed ahead. In your anger, Apostle Paul writes, in the King James, it says, be angry and sin not. So anger in itself is not necessarily sin, but it's dangerous and can easily lead to sin. Now, in my case, I learned early on as a child that anger is not okay. I did not see it expressed in my home, and much of my life I've told myself, either because I'm a Christian or I have perfectionistic tendencies, that it's not good to be angry. And also I hated it when my father passed away, and the anger I felt, I just didn't like it at all. And so I kind of got this idea, anger's bad, don't do it, as if as a human I couldn't feel angry. Sometimes I don't even know when I'm angry. Actually, I've gotten a lot better at this in the last few years, but it would be such that I might be 2-3 days later after something happened, and I'm still thinking and stewing about it, and I realize, oh, I must be angry. Didn't recognize it at first. Suppressing anger does not work. As a child, we used to take a ball into the public pool and take it underwater and try to hold that inflated ball underwater, and it tried to come up to the surface. It took a lot of energy to hold that ball down. And when we finally did let go of it, it came shooting up into the air. Anger is like that. It doesn't go away because we pretend it's not there or we stuff it down. There's still an energy from that anger that's doing something in you. In your anger, do not sin. Although it's not necessarily sin, as I said, anger is dangerous. And to give you an extreme example of this, I pastored in Springfield in 1998 when the Thurston shooting happened. Kip Kinkle, if you might recall, was a student at Thurston High School, and it happened to be that the principal of that school, his family attended my church. But Kip Kinkle on a Wednesday night shot both of his parents, who were teachers in the Springfield School District, and then on Thursday morning he walked into the cafeteria and began shooting students. Killed 2, almost killed a third, and wounded many students. It was a rough time in Springfield at that time, and in Oregon, in our nation actually. But here is what he had written before that in his diary or journal. I am so full of rage that I feel I could snap at any moment. I think about it every day, blowing the school up or just taking the easy way out, walk into a pep assembly with guns. In either case, people who are breathing will stop breathing. That is how I will repay all of you for all you put me through. So this demonstrates in an extreme way the danger of letting anger brew in our hearts, letting it simmer, harboring it, stewing over it. Very dangerous thing to do. So let's talk about expressing anger aggressively. Proverbs 29:11 says, "Fools give full vent to their anger, but the wise bring calm in the end." Now someone might say, I explode, and then it's all over with. I'm done. But what happens when there's an explosion? There's a lot of damage. I think of Mount St. Helens exploding in 1980. Yeah, it got over with. The big eruption happened, but the damage that was left behind was massive. And so it can be in our lives when we explode on people. We leave damage behind, even though we may feel better. Don't think of rage as something that you have a right to, or something that is caused by being pushed out of your control. God always provides a way out. 1 Corinthians 10:13, the Apostle Paul says, "No temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it." So if you tend to be an exploder, what you can do is you can be looking for a way out that God provides in the process of you becoming angry, giving full vent to your anger, because it doesn't probably happen just in the spur of the moment. There's usually a process. And you can observe yourself and learn about yourself, learn what your triggers are, but all the while saying, God promises a way out in every temptation. God, what is the way out for me now? Now, a third unhealthy way to deal with anger, besides stuffing it or aggressively expressing it, would be to be passive-aggressive. Which of these things have you done or had done to you? The silent treatment. saying no to something you were asked to do, but then just not doing it because you never wanted to do it in the first place. Dishing out sarcastic humor. Complaining behind someone's back, but acting like you're their best buddy when you're with them. Giving in to a request, such as going to a particular restaurant that you don't want to go to, not saying anything about it at the time that it's brought up, but then complaining the whole time that you're there. Passive aggression is a way to try to be in control without taking responsibility for your views or your feelings. It's a way to try to control people without being honest or direct about it. Healthy relationships require openness. Here is maybe an ultimate example of passive aggressive. The story is told of a husband who reportedly was amazed when he apologized to his wife because he had blown up. And he did this frequently. He would blow up at her, give a full vent to his anger. And he would say to her, he said to her, "I'm amazed how patient you are when I blow up like that." And she said, "Oh, I just go and clean the toilet." What did she use to clean the toilet? His toothbrush. That would be passive aggressive. Apostle Paul continues in verse 26, "Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry." In other words, don't let it carry over to the next day. Deal with your anger. Now, sure, there can be situations, schedule-wise or whatever, where it's impossible to deal with it right then. But the principle here is deal with your anger. And, verse 27, do not give the devil a foothold. I want you to think of somebody who's rock climbing. And as they're climbing a rock, they are looking for places to place their foot. And this is what the devil, you might say, is doing with us when we don't handle our anger in a healthy way. He's getting a foothold in our lives. He will quickly seize the opportunity to change that into nursing our anger and unforgiveness and a grudge. It can easily degenerate into hatred and resentment. You know, I was struggling to forgive someone one time, and I was on vacation at this time. I was reading a book. And the ironic thing was I was at Devil's Lake in Lincoln City reading this book. And I read this quote and I felt convicted by the Holy Spirit that this is what I was doing. It says this, "Of the 7 deadly sins, anger is possibly the most fun. To lick your wounds, to smack your lips over grievances long past, to roll your tongue over the prospect of bitter confrontation still to come, to savor the last toothsome morsel, both the pain you are given and the pain you are giving back. In many ways, it is a feast fit for a king. The chief drawback is what you are wolfing down is yourself. The skeleton at the feast is you." Well, this is a great verse to memorize. Ephesians 4:26 and 27. "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." Now, for a lot of people, when they go to memorize a scripture, one of the hardest parts is remembering the reference. So I want to give you some tricks, some strategies to help you remember the reference. And we'll use this reference, particularly 4:26, and you can do your own one on verse 27. So think of the number 4, and we want to associate that number with something that you already know that has the number 4 in it in your life. For example, you might know someone who is age 4, or you might remember when you were age 4, something that happened. Or maybe the date, the 4th, is significant to you. Maybe it's your birthday, your anniversary, or someone you love's birthday or anniversary. Or maybe the year 2004 holds significance to you, and you can remember that. Or maybe you could think of a table or chair has 4 legs. Or maybe there's channel 4 on the television, and you know what channel that is. Or there's an athlete that you like or know of that wears the number 4. So hopefully with that, you've found something that you can connect to Ephesians 4:26. 26 with the number 4. And let's think about 26. Same kind of thing. We want to associate that number with other things that we know that are 26. That's a little harder than 4, but there are lots of possibilities. For example, Highway 26, if you're familiar with that. Or again, age 26 happens to be the age I was when I got married, so I can easily remember that. Or maybe you know someone who is 26 or something significant happened in your life at age 26. Or how about the 26th of the month? Anniversary, birthday of yours or someone you know? Or the year. Maybe you know someone was born in 1926. Might not be living today. Or someone that's going to graduate in the year 2026. Or maybe you could just think of some coins, 26 cents, a quarter and a penny. Channel 26, an athlete with the number 26. Hopefully one of those will stick and you'll easily be able to remember this reference, Ephesians 4, 26 and 27. Now, one healthy way to deal with anger, we've talked about 3 unhealthy ways, but one healthy way would be to be assertive. That is to ask for what's wanted in a simple and direct fashion. This might be after you've settled down, if you have to settle down. But do so in a way that is considerate and gentle, considering the feelings of other people and respecting other people. Now, as much as I sometimes resist it, sometimes I need to go to someone and tell them that I was offended by something that they have done. You know, one time I was sitting in a meeting with some colleagues, and the person who was leading the meeting, I recognized that I had resentment toward them, and it was real. And I said to myself, should I stay after and ask to talk with him privately about this? And because I am averse to conflict, I decided not to do that. And I just drove home, and he drove home to his separate city. But on the drive home, I realized this is really bothering me. We've got to talk about it. So I gave him a call. I told him that some of the things that he had done in the past that I felt hurt by and that I was carrying this. And he had a great response. He said, "Thank you for that feedback. I'm going to try to learn to do better in the future." And so it was a beautiful experience. I know not every time you share like that, your feelings that you've been hurt by someone has a happy ending like that. It is important to own your own feelings and not accuse people, by the way. But those of us who hate conflict need to be reminded that conflict is part of life. If you're human, sometimes you'll have conflict and you'll have to work it out with another person. And actually, relationships often get better after conflict is worked out. So another healthy way to deal with anger besides being assertive is to release it to God, to drop it, to give it up, to let the Lord have it. Now for me, there's times when I can release things to the Lord, and there's other times when I need to talk to the person. It doesn't work to release things to the Lord. In fact, sometimes I would rather release it to the Lord because I don't want to sit down and have a confrontation with somebody, an uncomfortable conversation. But let me give you an example of dropping it in my own life where it worked. I've pastored in 2 churches. In one of those churches, they had a salary package that they told me about a few months before I came, and I said, that's fine. They said they were going to pick up the Social Security payment, both mine and the employer's part. Well, in the meantime, they had some budget problems and made some cuts, and they changed that. No longer picked that up for me and didn't tell me. So when I arrived as their pastor, no one ever told me this. I found this out and took offense. And I thought about it for a while, and I did realize that probably no one meant any harm. They were just trying to balance their budget and do what they needed to do. And no one forgot to tell me that I was part of that in the future. But I decided I would just drop it and not say a word to it. I just handed it over to the Lord, and it was done. It never bothered me. And so isn't it great to know that we can give things to a God who's powerful and who cares, and we can let him take care of it for us? So the next step today that I want you to consider is to ask these two questions. First of all, is there someone you need to talk to? Is there a conflict that's unresolved and you need to work it out with somebody and take that risk and do that challenging, uncomfortable thing? Is there someone that you need to talk to? Secondly, is there something in your life, anger, that you need to drop and let go of? Turn it over to the Lord. Consider that. Consider that. Someone said that anger is like a child. You don't want it driving the car, and you don't want to stuff it in the trunk. How true that is. So, I'll say the words of the Apostle Paul in closing. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold.